Marc Ostwald is Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services International.
There is clearly an effort to build bridges, particularly with two of the more tense relationships, i.e. with South Korea and Japan, who are seen as much more closely tied with the United States. But at the end of the day, both of those countries are also very closely tied into Asia. This is sort of essentially the nub of the problem for the whole of Asia. It's not just the big northeast Asian economies. It's a problem for there is going to be trade with China and the United States. Trying to balance the two is a very big challenge, but there is no or in either of this, i.e. it's not all US or China, it's US and China. And that for all of them, if China's clearly looking to reach out, particularly I noted the desire to reach out to the Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi and to Prime Minister Carney in Canada. Those are very important. Canada obviously has its own fight with the United States in terms of trade, and it needs, above all, to broaden its horizons. And the EU is simply not sufficient, basically, if it's going to find itself seeing a fairly substantial drop in trade with the United States.
President Xi urged members to safeguard multilateralism. What stood out for you in terms of these speeches? How is that all going to play out?
This is not an unfamiliar theme from President Xi or indeed Chinese officials as a whole, that the multilateral trading system needs to be preserved. And it's obviously in the face of resource nationalism, of greater, trade resistance to globalization that we're seeing, particularly in Europe and to a certain extent in North America. I say a certain extent because Canada is definitely not in the same camp as the United States. There is a clear, very strong determination to ensure that the trade volumes continue to grow.
In terms of what investors have been looking for, did you get what you were hoping for from these meetings?
I think it's two-sided on that side. I think everyone is glad that this is, shall we put on the sidelines now for a while. There is, however, a recognition that because this agreement doesn't basically deal with any of the big tensions between the US and China, that it's not that great. On the other hand, when one looks at some of the Asian stock markets, for example, particularly South Korea, the agreement that South Korea reached with the US and the fact that obviously US-China trade tensions are linked, has put the Korean stock market at its highest level since 2001. That is a recognition that people are feeling very relieved. And I think if one's looking at financial markets at the moment, everyone is looking for diversification opportunities because far too much, particularly in terms of the big investment in tech and in AI-related stocks, has been concentrated in the Magnificent Seven, as they're called in the US. And there is a recognition that, particularly in Asia, it's going to be part of the story. It is an absolutely critical part of the supply chain. And with these various agreements, that can go forward rather than the risk that some of this would lead to a lot of disruption, which would harm that outlook.